Hey, it's Ethan Skolnick. Welcome back to the Fanalyst YouTube channel. Please hit the like and subscribe button. We got plenty of other videos there on the channel, so make sure you're checking there frequently. I'm Ethan Skolnick. Producer today is Manny Chang, and my guest is Courtney Fallon. You can follow her at Courtney Fallon. There's a U in there. At Courtney Fallon
Yep.
on Twitter. And I first met Courtney when she was actually doing television down here in the Miami market. And what we're going to talk about today is kind of the transition from doing like really mainstream stuff to kind of creating something on your own and then sort of
Yeah.
blending the two back together, which I thought is a good example of what you're doing. Before we get into what you're doing now, BettorEdge, obviously working with the Miami Heat, can you talk a little bit about kind of how you got into the business in the first place and your journey to being a sports TV anchor?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Ethan. This is
Mhm.
long overdue since I sat you down on the NBC6 set. We did a little sports final stuff. You had some more hair on your head,
Wait a
but
second. What is this?
no. Now it's my time to start rolling.
Manny, cut the interview. Go ahead. I'm just kidding.
Anyways, yeah. Well, man, I was. It's funny. I was talking about resumes with a friend of mine yesterday, and my resume fills out a full 2 pages. And I'm happy that 10 years into the business, I graduated college in 2009. I got my first job on air in 2011, and that was in Providence, Rhode Island. Ironically, the same market that Ruthie Polinsky, who works for NBC6 right now, has started to go. But yeah, I mean, ever since I was 16 years old, I used to call into Boston sports radio, try to get on air. Back in those days, they told me I had to be 18. I couldn't be a woman. I couldn't be couldn't be a woman on sports radio. And I wrote my college essay about calling into these radio stations and having them get shot me down. And I said, like, I can't wait to call back. It was just always a drive, a passion within me. Growing up in Boston, I'm just very grateful that my time growing up in high school was right when the decade of dominance started. The Patriots won their first Super Bowl in 2001. I was a freshman in high school, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. I said, "Hey, why don't I follow the Celtics? Why don't I follow the Red Sox full season?" And it just became an innate passion, an innate love, and something that I just continued. And I always knew that I had within me.
Mhm.
I think that you can tell someone by their drive and their moxie, and not only that, but just a general sense of a knowledge of what you're talking about. This industry is not for the faint of heart, and if you don't have that drive, then you're not going to make it to the next level, and that's just the bottom line.
And what you're talking about there with radio shows, I used to try to do that. I'm a little bit older than you, as you decided to remind me as we started this broadcast. But I used to try to call into shows also, and that was the thing. I mean, on radio, and I know obviously radio is still up in the Boston area and WEI,
Hmm.
and it is bigger, I think, than it is down here in South Florida right now. Boston, Philadelphia, New York, those markets, it's still thriving. You don't have as much corporate ownership necessarily. There's a little bit more on the local level, but on those in those places, the sports radio. I mean, it's a daily pulse still. I mean, it's still
Yeah.
something that is significant, and it kind of drives the conversation. Now, then you get into the business though in a very mainstream way, and you end up down here as a sports anchor, as you mentioned. Talk about that process a little bit, if you can, and kind of being on the other side of it, where you're not trying to get on the show, but you are actually the show.
Oh, well, it's NBC6, that was the time of my life, and there's a reason that I came back to go and work for the Miami Heat all after all of these years, because it is an organization that just demands excellence, professionalism from all of their staff to their players to the local media. And I felt that there was a real comparison in my mind to the times that I covered the New England Patriots for NFL Network, which is where I
Mhm.
left after I left South Florida. I went to work in a national stage. I was a college football sideline reporter. I was doing some stuff out of New York for Bleacher Report. And eventually, my dream and my life goal was to be a national correspondent for NFL Network. I had worked for them for a couple of years during the NFL draft,
Mhm.
and this was a very fast and rapid rise to fame. But at the same time, I mean, yeah, when it becomes like you are the show, you have to put your best foot forward. And I think the biggest thing for me is reading and preparation. I mean,
Mhm.
never stop having a thirst for information, never stop, networking. I mean, networking is my middle name, but I think the biggest thing for me as well is information, education. Never
Mhm.
stop educating yourself. Never stop having a thirst to read and to write and to really feed into what other journalists are doing, helping other journalists promote their pieces, their works. You just start to build a rapport and a network that is second to none, truly. Because in times like this, you have to rely on the people around you to succeed. And if other people can recognize that you do good work and you are a good person, you have good journalistic ethics, and that's how you go to the next level, and you hold on, that's how you reach the next step.
So you're talk about the experience a little bit in NFL Network,
Yeah.
because again, being a national reporter, it's one thing to be sort of a local sports anchor. People get to know
Yeah.
you, they see you on a regular basis, but then it's like, oh, this person is reporting on my team. I've never seen this person before, right?
Yeah.
They may know your background, that it's a Boston-based background, or you've been down here in Miami, and so maybe you have familiarity with those teams, but then you're not just focusing on those teams. What was that experience like for you?
Mhm. Well, it was interesting because I was covering the Patriots for NFL Network,
Mhm.
obviously, and that was also the same year that Brady had just come after. That was also the same year that Brady just came out of his Deflategate 4-game suspension. So
Mhm.
you can imagine that place is Fort Knox. Well, it's like Alcatraz at that point. You just can't get any information whatsoever. They're not interested in the national reporters by any means. If it's a boy or a girl, or my name is Albert Breer, or I'm the person that came after Albert Breer after he
Mhm.
was not allowed back into that building. So it was a rather interesting endeavor. So they sent me on the road to cover Thursday Night Football. And that was the most interesting part, that
Mhm.
once a week I had to go in and walk in and learn the 53-man roster, head coaches, and schemes times two of two
Mhm.
teams that were facing each other on Thursday Night Football. And not only that, but to go in there, and every single week it was different. And that was definitely a challenge. It was more than a challenge, but it got me into the forefront of a lot of people. That Good Morning Football, I was the morning reporter for that show when it first started, and knowing and seeing how much it's grown over the years, that's definitely something that I'm proud of. But no, it was for sure, it's a challenge. And I will say this as well, that although I had some fun times and some easy times, if it's too easy for you, it's not good for you. You're
Mhm.
not thriving, you are not growing. The times that I've had, the most challenging times where I've sat there, and I'm sure that everyone else can relate to this, is sitting down and banging your head against the wall, or coming home and letting out a little, somber cry because you're stressed out. But those are the times when you really look at yourself in the mirror and you say, I'm really stressed out. I put my all into this. I hope I'm better. But then you realize that those baby steps and those little things that pushed you will make your work better, inevitably better, every single time. So never stay complacent, because how do you think the diamonds are made? They're put under pressure. And that's how you continue to grow and to thrive.
So the transition back. So you're a reporter now. Again, you're doing the sideline work. You're working, games from different NFL teams, and now you're back working with the team,
Yeah.
with the Miami Heat, with the radio broadcast. And it's different because you're more in-house now than you were before. Whereas, as you mentioned, you're covering the Patriots, and they don't
Hmm.
want you around because they wouldn't want me around. They don't want anybody around, right? That's just, I mean, that's just the way that they are. It's a confrontational, adversarial relationship that the media has with certain organizations in
Hmm.
particular, that one being one of them, that one believing that the less
Yeah.
information that they let out, the more of a chance that they have to win, which it was
Yeah.
work for some and not for others. But now you're actually working with the team. I mean, the object
Hmm.
is to promote the players on a team. The Heat can be a closed up organization, but I don't think they're as
Yeah.
nasty about it as the Patriots are, because nobody is. And the Heat obviously have a record of success and, like you mentioned, class, professionalism in this market that is pretty much
Yeah.
unmatched.
Yes.
What has that experience been like going back to working inside?
Well, after I left NFL Network, I was dabbling in some documentary stuff that I had done independently. But shortly after, I'd worked for the New York Giants. Now, this was
Mhm.
in 2017, and this was unfortunately the first year that they started to really slip in the standings
Mhm.
and had some troubling times. So working for an organization, and one as, that has such a rapport as the New York Giants, that, the Duke on the football is Wellington Mara.
Mhm.
And that was from the New York Giants. So there was a level of excellence that I had to uphold. And I was actually told that I wasn't really allowed to have any sort of journalistic rapport, even though I was going into the locker rooms just to ask questions and get more of a feel for the players, the organization, certain people, to get the familiarity there. I think that with every organization, and something that people just kind of, keep tentatively within themselves, is they're nervous about, certain reporters, as myself, who it is my job and my lifeblood to be outspoken, and be outspoken in a way that has an opinion as a female in this market, or even nationally as well.
Mhm.
I think it's more so that my role with the Heat, and I willingly came back to this, was because I wanted to cover a team again. That
Mhm.
COVID has really changed a lot of what is going on within the teams, within
Mhm.
the way that people are covered. Even though I do have my own personal podcast, Bad Signal Podcast, which, as you mentioned, is sponsored by BettorEdge, and I have a presenting sponsor. I mean, no, the Patriots are not going to credential me
Mhm.
as a podcast reporter, even if I
Mhm.
have a swing for the NFL on my show. That being said, I think there's certain ways that you cover a team, and there's just like a certain respect that you have for the organization. There's a certain role that you have. Me personally, I don't speak publicly about my opinions on the team. That is not my role.
Mhm.
My role right now is, it's in a very important role. I facilitate everything behind the scenes. I am the point guard, so to speak, for the radio broadcast, where I'm the connection between the talent and the rundown, the engineers. Not only that, but the 790, the ticket, the Odyssey people. I'm just kind of, if there's an issue, I send it up to my bosses over at Bally Sports Sun. I'm able to log and to make sure all the radio calls are just, everything is being distributed. So it's not in my role. I have so much on my plate. It's not in my role to say, well, I think Jimmy Butler should have thought about shooting a three at the end of that game instead of that second, that 2 point shot. And like, it's not,
That's my
it's not in
role,
my.
Courtney. That's my role.
Exactly. It's not in my place. But you know what though? I love it because there are other opportunities, at least for myself, to be an entrepreneur, which
Mhm.
is exactly what I'm building with my business. I do have a production company, but I mean, it's I'm really looking to take things to the next level this next year with my podcast, with the people that I come in to sponsor my shows, to support the content, getting more people, hires involved, and
Mhm.
and expanding into video content, and making, really compelling sit down interviews, which is what I've always done. So, that platform, which is built by my own self, allows me to have the freedom to do that. And I think it's even more rewarding than if the Heat said, here's a microphone and a job, which eventually I'm crossing my fingers that that's going to happen relatively soon. There are some things that I'm looking forward to
Mhm.
stepping into this year.
All right, I want to get into Better Edge a little bit more with you in a second, but before I do, I got one more question because you mentioned something here about the way the teams are covered
Yes.
during the COVID age, and that is something that I've talked a lot about on some of these Fanalyst episodes that we've done,
Yeah.
because I do think that the landscape has changed and it's not changing back, and I do think that
Hmm.
is creating more opportunities, perhaps for those who are not maybe credentialed by mainstream outlets, because very simply, the mainstream
Yeah.
outlets don't have the access that they used to have anyway, which gives them
Yep.
very limited advantages. Like when I was traveling, I traveled for 20 years with the Sun Sentinel, Miami Herald, Palm Beach Post, covering the Heat, covering the Dolphins. I had access to the locker room. There's no access to the locker room anymore. I don't
Yep.
know if it's ever coming back. So if I was still a beat writer, I wouldn't really have an advantage over person, covering from their couch, covering from the bar, because I can't get to know some of these players anyway as a mainstream reporter. You talk about it. You were the Patriots, you're in the locker room, you're in those lockers, and even as much access as they tried to deny, at least you could get in the locker room, right?
Yeah.
Do you see do you see now that again COVID has changed things permanently? Because you've been on the outside and the inside in terms of the way that teams are covered, and also the types of reporters and analysts who may be able to make an impact now because the playing field has been leveled?
I certainly think that COVID has changed the landscape of sports reporting and sports business reporting. I mean, for that sense, you could think the same about someone who was working for the New York Times and the stock exchange. I mean, connections with people digitally are more important than ever, but the ability to network and freelance and get in front of people that you could be talking to be making connections with, even more often than not, that's really just a part of the industry that's dwindling away. And I know that even personally, a mentor of mine, which is, he's beloved and he's not beloved, is Dan Shaughnessy, who
Mhm.
longtime reporter from the Boston Globe. He just wrote a book about covering the Celtics in the 1980s. I Wish It Lasted Forever, which is a fantastic book. He actually had me give one to Pat Riley because he talked about Pat Riley and his days with the Lakers as well. He used to travel on the road with the teams in like podunk French lick towns with,
Right.
Larry Bird at the bar. And, I mean, they're more or less like sharing buses on the way to the arena. Like, you got to think about that. Okay. So that was what, 40 years ago? So
Mhm.
things are progressively changing, and it's going to be even harder and an even bigger challenge for the average journalist or the average podcast reporter, or or just anyone to be reporters. But that's the nature of the business. That's the nature of the beast. Because if you had told me 5 years ago that there were certain things that were required of me, you had to be a Swiss Army knife regardless in
Right.
order to survive in this industry. Is for you, Ethan Skolnick, someone who is old and and runs his own business and
Look at this.
I mean, like, you are a seasoned vet, and you're starting a YouTube channel, you're interviewing other journalists, like, you are adapting. And that is how this industry is continuing to work and to move, because if you don't move with the industry, it will run you right over. That's the bottom line.
That's fair. Actually, now that you work for the Heat, we can use a Spoism here. Adapt or die is one of his favorite
Adapt or die.
expressions,
Yeah, exactly.
and that's one of those I've taken. So let's close here with kind of one of the ways that you've adapted. You mentioned you've gone into the entrepreneurial space here with Better Edge, and your own podcast. Where do you see that? Like, first, what is the biggest challenge of? You and I could probably speak about this off the air for 10 hours, but like in a couple of minutes here, what is the biggest challenge to kind of starting your own thing, managing your
Mm.
own thing, and then where do you see it going?
Well, consistency is the biggest key, I think, with anyone with a podcast. And what I've learned, um, last March, I just needed a break. I was very overwhelmed with certain things. I didn't know where my career was going. I just was having a very tough time emotionally, maintaining it as my podcast was growing and growing exponentially. I had interviewed Lewis Riddick right before the I guess it was before the draft. No, it was in somewhat and then right after free agency started. And it got this one clip was all over the national news. It was like, it was Patriots stuff, and he was talking about Bill Belichick coming out in free agency and hitting the ground running like no one's ever seen before. And it wound up being true. And it was great. It was like, how can I ever top that? Like,
Mm.
will people want to listen? Am I a failure if I put out a show or I interview someone and they don't like it? Am I boring? There's a lot of the internal struggle about wanting things to get better, and having to understand that the consistency of putting shows out there, your audience loves it. And it's one thing for me to say, I think this is stupid. Oh my God, are people going to think what I'm saying is dumb? I don't think I'm saying much. And that might be the greatest thing ever for someone else to listen to. So never have fear that you are inadequate in any way. And I think that I struggle to do that. And the consistency thing is a huge part of rebuilding your audience. I took 6 months off because I wanted to take a break from it. I was overwhelmed, and I lost more than half of my audience,
Mhm.
in terms of numbers wise, and that was tough. But I'm still the same old me. I feel that I've come out and I've improved. I'm more verbally cognizant of the things that I'm saying. I'm more fluid. I'm wiser. I'm more educated, I would say. And yeah, I mean, the internal struggle for for your own audience or your own business or getting into entrepreneurship is setting goals and keeping them. And I think it's just the personal manifestation of really just like listening to everyone, because everyone's got their own opinions, whether whether you like it or not, and actually just taking small steps to implement these things, because that's how you're going to make your show better.
All right. Well, if you want to follow all of Courtney Fallon's work, you can do it at Courtney Fallon. I do believe that this app I've got is going to be very useful to her down the road. So we're going to have a conversation about that off the air. We'll also have a conversation about what kind of hat I should get to cover up my thinning hair.
Yes,
Courtney,
you should get a Fade Fallon hat. You should get a Fade Fallon hat.
You know what? That's what this was all about. You're just selling, just like I'm always selling. That's what you do. All right, Courtney's got a cake to get to that she's baking over there, right? That's serious. You gotta get the.
I really have a cake. My best friend, she just got a new job today, so I'm surprising her with to make her a cake. See, I'm nice. I'm a nice person.
Look at that. All right, follow her at Courtney Fallon. Thanks to our producer Manny Chang, and definitely like and subscribe to the Fanalyst YouTube channel.
Thank you.